Welcome into the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. We talk about sports topics of local interest, occasionally a national topic or two. We'll talk about podcasters who do themselves, I think. And we have our gambling segment, our first one of the year, plus the favorite portion of the podcast where you can ask me a question on any topic. Go to the Twitterverse, hit up hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. It doesn't have to be a sports topic. It certainly can be. Rick asks them, I answer them, and away we go. Rick, we are inching closer and closer to the start of the NFL season. We had a little bit of a college slate. I know we don't count it in our gambling totals, but I was very convinced on Notre Dame on Saturday, as I mentioned on the podcast last week, and they did not let me down. That was an easy one to start the season with. And maybe that's the worst thing that can happen is get an easy one under your belt.
It might be, but I'll admit they kind of won me over a little bit. They had me as a believer because I've felt like over the last several years, quarterback has kind of been the issue for Notre Dame. Not that they haven't had decent quarterbacks, but when they get up into those elite games, they're playing in Ohio State or someone like that, their quarterbacks haven't measured up in those games. This kid looks like the real deal. Sam Hartman, he's so experienced and he's accurate and he just knows the game. I mean, it felt like he was playing at a different speed from the other guys on the field in that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it felt like that offense could have scored, 1,000 touchdowns if it had wanted in that game. It played at whatever pace it wanted to play at. And so, all right, I'm not officially with you and I, but myself, I'm off to a 1-0 start. I'm glad I didn't buy into the USC's defense is going to get better hype train because they certainly didn't cover against woeful San Jose State. So I'm glad I stayed away from that, but I'm glad I got off to a good start.
I made the mistake of testing out the new the new college rules with the running clock, not stopping for first downs. I tried the under in that USC game. It did not go well for me.
Yeah, well, just keep in mind, no matter the new rule or not, that's still a USC defense that's out there. It's still a Lincoln Riley defense that's out there.
That's right. And I'm not the only one who is aware of the rule changes. I think Vegas might have been alerted about that as well. So
yes.
All right, let's get into our topics for the week. We'll start with the Bengals. They wrapped up the preseason on Saturday with a 21-19 loss to the Commanders. Skinny, we're now a week and a half away from their week one game in Cleveland against the Browns. I think, big story this week was cut down day coming on Tuesday. They got down to their 53-man roster. Out of those cuts, I don't think there were any big surprises, but probably the most notable storyline coming from that was Jake Browning beating out Trevor Siemian for that second quarterback spot. Trevor Siemian got cut. That was something that you had talked about a lot on here. It's something that most of the local media members had seemed to think after what we saw through the preseason. What was your final takeaways when they got down to cut down day?
Yeah, I mean, he earned it for sure. I even phrased that to Zach yesterday. Did he win this job, or did you just have to pick a guy? And he said he thought Jake went and won it. Do I feel comfortable with Jake Browning having to start multiple games for this team? No, definitely not. Am I comfortable even if he has to start a game? Probably not. But I will say, for a lot of the hand-wringing, it was rightful at times. I mean, he doesn't have a howitzer for an arm. He had some inconsistencies in camp. Right or wrong, when the lights were on, I know against backups, all those goofy things, he completed his last 10 passes of the preseason and looked pretty good in doing so, that last drive in Atlanta. And then, honestly, he put together that scoring drive going 4 for 4. The second drive, they converted a third down, a pass to Tanner Hudson. They got called back by a face mask on Trey Hill. He might have led him to another touchdown drive. So I think, to his credit, he did go out and win that job. Do I think he's a long-term answer? Probably not. But, at least he won the job. At least, again, somebody didn't win this by default.
When you say he's not a long-term answer, do you just mean going forward into next year and beyond? Or do you mean there's a good chance that they'll bring in another guy here after other teams make their cuts and they'll kind of let him learn the playbook throughout the next several weeks, and by midseason, maybe they'll have a different backup?
Yeah, and I mean, unless Jake continues to improve, and maybe that happens too. Maybe he continues to take strides. But I do think that that's going to take place. It's just, again, no knock. He's a very smart guy. I think I've said this before. The wide receivers all come to him during games to ask what he sees. They don't want to bother Joe during games, and so he's the guy they go to. And I think he's going to make a fine offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach one day. But I mean, this is his 5th year in the league, and he's never taken a snap in a regular season NFL game. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. But I will say, if the plan was you got into camp and you got into first preseason game, whatever you saw, neither of these guys are really what we're looking for, then Jake Browning should have always been the no-brainer call. And he ended up playing himself into that anyways. Trevor Siemian was terrible.
He did,
but
yeah.
even just looking at them, if neither one of them were the guy you wanted them to be for the backup quarterback position, then you got to go with Browning because he's so familiar with the organization, the playbook,
Correct.
the guys on the team already. I mean, it probably made it a really easy decision. The other thing that we talked a little bit. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think they'll go get somebody. In fact, probably by the time this podcast is up, they will have already signed somebody for that third spot. And to your point, you now have a guy familiar with the system as the main backup, and then whoever this other person would be, can use the next month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe the whole year to learn the system and then go back and compete in camp next year.
The other thing we had talked a little bit about last week and the week before, we were talking about cut downs, was running backs and tight ends. Are they going to go 4 running backs, 3 tight ends, 3 running backs, 4 tight ends, 3 of both? What would be the situation? It turns out they keep 4 running backs, Mixon, Brown, Evans, and Williams, and they end up keeping 3 tight ends, Irv Smith, Drew Sample, Mitchell Wilcox. Skinny, were you surprised by that at all? And what do you think of the tight end situation specifically? Is there a chance they might add someone else there?
Yeah, they did that last year. They went and got Devin Asiasi off waivers. They cut him this year, obviously. I'm a little surprised Tanner Hudson didn't make it. I thought he played his way into a role. And quite frankly, I hate to keep crapping on the guy. I just didn't see anything from Drew Sample in training camp. I mean, he was hurt for most of last year. Really wasn't an overly productive player. I know he does things, and Zach even pointed out, some of the things that he does, his smarts and all those things, a lot of intangibles to me. But I honestly, I didn't think he was very productive to the point he should have made this team, but maybe he'll prove me wrong. I hope for his sake he does. I thought Tanner Hudson outplayed him. I think Mitchell Wilcox has played his way probably into the backup tight end role over the last couple of years. Once they saw him get healthy in camp, that was kind of a no-brainer for them to keep him. And then I wouldn't say I was surprised. I guess I was a little surprised that they kept Travion Williams, but I think what it shows is, and Zach made this point to us yesterday after the cuts were made and we talked to him, of Travion playing himself into the mix for that third down back. And I think that's what they wanted from the get-go. They wanted him to be that blocking third down running back to take some of the shoulder off of Joe Mixon, as opposed to giving it to a rookie in Chase Brown. Now, Chase played well, I thought, in the preseason. I can't grade his pass blocking ability. They seem to like it. I don't know if they love it. They at least seem to like it. But the way Zach was talking yesterday, I think the reason they kept Travion Williams is, frankly, they really believe Travion Williams has enough time here in the next 2 weeks to play himself into that backup running back spot. And I didn't think that was the case. That's why I didn't think they were going to keep him. I thought they'd let him go through, bring him back to practice squad, then toggle him and Chris Evans, and however they were going to do that throughout the season. But I think they really want Travion to be the guy. Is
it possible that Chase Brown didn't show them what they were hoping for during the preseason, and that's part of why Williams is still here?
I think he did as a runner and a receiver, to be honest with you. I believe that. But again, and they haven't crapped on his pass blocking ability. They haven't overly raved about it, but it sounds like at least he's a willing pass blocker. But again, it's something that's hard for, I think, us to see if you're not watching film and seeing what coaches want to see. And maybe he is. Maybe Travion over the next 2 weeks doesn't show them what they're hoping he shows them, and Chase is the backup running back on game days. I do think it'll be more of a 3-man rotation than a 2-man. And I don't even mean that because Joe's going to get the bulk of the first and second down snaps. But perhaps there's a role for Chase to get 3 to 5 snaps, and then Travion's your third down back, and Chris Evans is down on game day. Or maybe Chris is a third down back. Maybe he showed enough. It's a weird mix because I don't think there's a clear-cut guy at that spot at the moment, and you only got 2 weeks to figure this out.
Yeah, it doesn't seem so. Now, that's not running back isn't a position that you think they might add someone, is it?
I did a couple of weeks ago. I don't think so now. I don't think so now. I think I think if that was the case, they would have only kept 3 guys.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking. Once you saw 4 there and just the way it played out, I didn't think anyone really wowed in the preseason, but it seemed like all of them did enough that you weren't in panic mode or anything and felt you need to scramble and add another body. Some of the other notables, at least that popped up to me, and I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say. Hakeem Adeniji, I thought was an interesting name that got whacked. Any thoughts on that backup lineman spot?
Yeah, I had him on my 53 only because I wasn't sure where the Dante Smith injury was coming off of Friday with the shoulder. If you were going to tell me he was healthy, and apparently he is, then I would have cut Hakeem. I mean, he had slipped to third team in camp, pretty much was that guy. They had some issues at tackle during some of the preseason games, and so Hakeem got some run, but he just didn't show them. And once you saw him taking reps with the threes, it was almost like you're the odd man out. They still got La'el Collins waiting in the wings. He's going to be on PUP for at least the first 4 weeks as he returns from that knee injury. And so I think for them, a tackle was going to go because of that. I think they felt comfortable. I think Deontay may be the swing guy after all, with Jackson Carman being inactive. But, Hakeem had just slipped behind those guys.
Yeah, then Trent Taylor was the name that I know you had mentioned. The writing was probably on the wall for him with the way that they had drafted this year, and the local people knew it. But I think even when his name popped up on that list of guys who were cut, the national media were kind of shocked by it just because he's had a role the last few years.
Yeah, I think I saw Ian Rappaport's tweet was surprising, and then I saw a bunch of people clap back. Not a surprise at all, because they drafted Charlie Jones for a reason. And I get it. You don't need to know all the new. I know he's an NFL reporter, a national reporter. I don't expect even those guys to know every nuance of a team, of where they're going and why they drafted guys. But I think for all of us, I had a friend of mine that actually texted me yesterday as well and said Trent Taylor got cut, ? And I said, he got cut the day they drafted Charlie Jones. I mean, that was pretty clear.
Yeah, but see, that's the whole point right there. Although, I saw local media members clapping back at Rappaport being like, oh, wake up. Everyone knew this already. It's like, well, nationally, no, they didn't. No one cares about what's going on with Trent Taylor. And second of all, not even from a national perspective, but if you ask 90% of the Bengals fans in the stadium on next Sunday, they're not going to be aware of that fact. That's going to be news to them, or they're going to be a little bit surprised that little white guy who was making plays last year and returning punts isn't on the team anymore. So, I don't understand the losing their minds, because that was somewhat notable. I mean, you might have known it was coming if you were following training camp every day, but aside from that, it was fairly notable. I think from a national perspective, it was a fine tweet. That's sometimes we get a little overzealous here in the Midwest with our sports teams.
Yeah, I sometimes roll my eyes at some of the stuff they do, but on that one, I'm like, I get it. You don't need to know all the nuances, but it wasn't surprising. It was pretty obvious. I think the whole point for keeping Trent Taylor was, if Charlie Jones had been a disaster handling punts in camp and in preseason games, you've got a nice little backup plan there. But the plan all along was, you're drafting this guy to eventually be your slot receiver down the road and your punt returner in the short term. It was pretty clear. And, if Trent hooks on with another team, great. If not, I'm assuming they bring him back as an insurance policy on the practice squad.
Yeah. And then, we knew this was coming as well. Brad Robbins beat out Drew Chrisman. That was pretty obvious that was going to be the case, as long as Robbins wasn't terrible in preseason, I think, right?
Yeah, and when they drafted him, I think at that point, even though Drew had some experience, that was kind of Robbins' job to lose. And Drew punted well. I mean, he averaged 46 I think he actually averaged 1/10 of a yard less gross. I think Robbins was 46.4, Chrisman was 46.3. Chrisman's net was 46.3. He had 3 punts returned for no yards. Actually 1 punt return for no yards and 2 fair catches. Brad's was like 42 something, but Brad's hang time and directional, all the things they asked him to do. The operation of the kicking game was flawless. I mean, Evan McPherson was 8 for 8. Not all of those Brad held, but Brad held for a chunk of them. That was kind of flawless. So I think once he showed that again, it was his job to lose, and he did not lose it.
Yeah. We could talk about the defensive line, because I did think there's at least a name or two on there that got cut that was, an NFL quality player, in my opinion. But to me, none of those were going to be surprises, just because there were so many bodies and so much depth at that position, that it was like, you knew there were going to be a couple decent players cut there.
Yeah, I was talking to Paul Daner Jr. from The Athletic, and I said, I tried to sneak Raymond Johnson III on my final 53, and he said, so did I. I was trying to speak it into existence, because he really was. He really did pop in preseason, but, it was such a crowded group that, even Jeff Gunter, who they like and drafted and liked him, all through the process, he gets cut. It was just a tight room to begin with. And, yeah, I think you're right. Some guys who are pretty good players ended up getting whacked at that position.
Yeah, the two you mentioned were exactly who I was thinking of. Just guys that showed they can play already a little bit, or at least looked like they can. And, there's not enough room for them. But I imagine they'll latch on somewhere, or if not, they'll be back on the practice squad. Skinny, coming away from the preseason, Joseph Osai has a high ankle sprain, we've learned. How big of a concern is that going into the season? Is this something that's going to keep him out for multiple games? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, there was no timeline yesterday. We talked to Zach again on Thursday. Hopefully, there's a clearer timeline to that. And those high ankle sprains can go for multiple weeks sometimes. And he was kind of your definitive rotational third end. And now you're to Miles Murphy, who didn't wow in the preseason. And Lou Anarumo made a point to us last week. He loathes playing rookie corners if he can help it, just because of their inexperience. And the mistakes they make. And he made a point of how pass rushers in this league need some time to develop too. And I know there's a lot of people crapping on Miles Murphy and calling him a bust already, which is just idiotic to me. You haven't seen enough from the guy one way or the other to claim he's either an all-pro or a bust. He's just a guy trying to make his way through his first camp, for goodness sakes. But, I mean, you may have him thrust into that rotational, defensive end role, and he's going to have to step up and play some big boy snaps.
Yeah, the Miles Murphy thing is funny because on one hand, I get it. It's like you draft a guy first overall. There are guys who pop right away and flash and look the part, and that's what you want out of your first round draft pick. So I get being like, oh, he doesn't exactly look the part just yet or look like an immediate contributor. At the same time, it is insane to start calling a guy a bust because of a couple of preseason games. I mean, that's just, I don't think that's remotely reasonable for a defensive end that's just getting his first snap. I mean, what, like 20 something snaps in the third preseason game that people are worried
Correct.
about that? It's like, relax. I think we need a little bit more tape to go off of.
And Washington's passing game was get it back, get it out quick as you could. I mean, it's I can't expect the guy to pop pass rushing on the handful of snaps that a guy has a deep drop on. I mean, listen, I thought he had a really good last week at camp. That's where he finally popped to me. And it didn't carry over fully to the Washington game, but some of that, again, is out of his control with what a team is doing offensively. But, again, you're going to ask this kid probably if Osai has to miss some time to be a rotational end right off the bat. Or you're going to ask Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson to play more snaps than you'd like them to play.
Skinny La'el Collins was added to the PUP list, physically unable to perform, which means he'll have to miss at least 4 games, right, before he's able to return. That's the rule, the way it works now?
Correct. Yep, correct.
Yeah, so what do you think was the thought process there with La'el Collins? Is that just kick the can down the road a little bit, see how it works out over the first few games, and then maybe you can plug him in as a potential backup, or is it possible that they'd cut bait with him at some point?
I think that was possible to cut bait because of what you could save in the salary situation. I mean, you still got the Burrow contract out there. You still got T out there, which I've felt this for a while that it's not going to get done. But yeah, I think it is kick the can down the road. He's yet to practice. So that's step one. He's got to return to practice. He's not done any of that yet. So that made all the sense in the world. And then after those 4 games, you can figure out where you're at with Jonah Williams. You can figure out where you're at maybe with your backup swing tackle. And maybe he is a real insurance policy that you're like, hey, we've got all our nickels accounted for this year. However you're going to structure the Burrow contract, whenever that's done, you've got that accounted for or whatever. If you have all that accounted for, I know he's an expensive backup, but what's been the holdup over the last 2 years in the postseason, right, has been injuries to that offensive line, or 2 years ago, really just the offensive line talent in general. La'el can also play some guards, so you have a valuable piece possible as a backup. It's an expensive insurance policy, but you got an insurance policy in Max Sharping last year. He was more expensive than what you would normally pay a backup. And while he did well in the Buffalo game, he was overmatched by Chris Jones in the Kansas City game, but he was a nice insurance policy. He paid off enough for what you were paying him. La'el, you're expecting to pay off as a starter. And so if something were to happen in this season and you can plug a guy with all the starts under his belt that La'el Collins has, God forbid Orlando Brown goes down and you have to put Jonah back at left tackle, however that shakes down, you do have a guy who is a bona fide starter in this league. And so that's where I think the initial thing is, kick it down the road. Let's see where we're at after 4 weeks for everything, and then see what decision we have to make at that point. But it may be a good insurance policy to keep around.
Yeah, he wasn't great last year by any stretch of the imagination, but I would feel a lot more confident if he's the backup option. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think Jackson Carman, for whatever reason, he's fine at left tackle. But if you're a swing tackle backup, you've got to be able to play right, and he's not played very well at that spot. Maybe he gets better over the next few weeks. I'm glad for Deontay Smith. He's a good kid and all, but he was the guy that was inactive for almost every game last year. The guy only has played in 3 games in his NFL career over 2 seasons. I'm going to feel a lot better with La'el Collins as the main backup if it comes to it than I will with Deontay Smith or Jackson Carman.
Yeah, Skinny, we were just talking about Myles Murphy and kind of thoughts on him already coming out. I know we were just saying how silly it is to make judgments on rookies already, but just looking at it now after the cuts, and we've been through the first 3 preseason games, you've seen them in training camp every day. All 8 draft picks made this team. Do you think this will be looked back on as a good draft class for the Bengals? Again, not going to hold you to this, realize it's absurd to make a judgment this early, but looking at it based on what we know right now, do you think this will turn out to be a good class?
I do, and some of it is, DJ Ivey did not make this team because they needed to force him on the roster. So it wasn't like, man, we drafted him, but gosh, we don't have anybody else. They signed Sidney Jones, who started games in this league. Now Sidney had an injury issue, but didn't play very well. They genuinely like DJ Ivey. He's had some issues in a couple of games where they've thrown at him and all of those things, but he's got all the measurables you can want and flashed at times in camp. DJ Turner was a standout at points of camp. Andre Yoshibach is better than they thought, and I think they thought a lot of Andre Yoshibach. The one guy who's a little disappointing because he hasn't popped is Charlie Jones, but he hasn't been awful, and he's playing through an injury. And, it's okay. Jordan Battle's had his really, really good moments, and he's had his really, really bad moments. He really struggled. He had a really good first series the other night, and then after that, he was a mess. And I get it. He's your 4 safety probably at the moment. Then we go back to Murphy at the top, who, again, the jury's still very much out on all these guys. But, literally, I could make a case for all of these picks really proving they belong on this roster, not by default, but by proving they belong. And I think it's a good thing because this is a good roster.
Yeah, definitely. I was just curious to get your thoughts on that. Again, we'll see what happens, not just a year from now, but even beyond that to really judge it. But the last 2 years, all the picks have made the team. And I think that says a little bit of something because it felt like a lot of times they'd draft and there'd be 2 or 3 guys where you're like, well, they got probably no chance.
Yeah, and some of that, again, I think all these guys did earn their way on, but keep in mind when you're having to pay certain position groups what you're having to pay, you need to have guys on rookie contracts. And so that's a lot of guys on rookie contracts at the moment, which is a good thing. It means you also like those guys, but there's also some cost savings involved with some of that too.
Yeah, definitely. One last thing real quick here. The Bengals released their own, I wouldn't say it was like Hard Knocks necessarily, but kind of a Hard Knocks-esque behind the scenes video series that they just launched on their YouTube page, I guess, and on their website. It's called From the Jungle, Bengals All Access. And there were a couple of things I thought were pretty interesting about it. One, they had Zach Taylor narrating the first episode, which I thought maybe he was going to be the narrator for the whole series. Sounds like they'll have different narrators each episode. But either way, I was kind of surprised you could get an NFL head coach to commit to that at all.
I was going to say, maybe for that first episode, you can do that, but there's no way he's got time to do that through a whole season.
Well, that's it. But think about a head coach during training camp, even. The fact that he would be like, I'll sit down and narrate this scripted thing. And I'm not talking about they're filming him and he's talking. I'm talking about he did voiceovers throughout the whole thing for every little thing that happened. Like, they're going to show footage of Orlando Brown coming to town. That's Zach Taylor narrating him on the plane and him flying in and what it meant. So it was pretty cool in that aspect that Zach agreed to do that. I thought that was big. Also, I didn't think it was as whitewashed as you would have expected or cleaned up. It was, you had players cussing. They bleeped it out, but you had players cussing on camera. You had the skirmish with the Packers in practice, and that was shown. And there were some interesting little contract things that were shown. So I thought they actually gave you some actual behind-the-scenes stuff from it, despite it being from the team's own production camp, I guess. And maybe the best part from it were the scenes at the very end. It looked like maybe they were teasing the next episode, and it showed them like negotiating free agency deals. Like they were on the phone and they're running between rooms like, oh, we spent this much on this position. Do we still have, what do we have for this position? Can we make the deal? That type of thing. That's fascinating to me. I love watching how that works in between the front office people. And I thought that was really good footage. I'm hoping that's in the next episode.
Yeah, I know this won't get public but I would love to see whatever's going on behind the scenes in the Joe Burrow situation, what those conversations are like. We're never going to see that. I don't think Joe's going to allow that. I mean, remember, they both went into this saying we're not going to negotiate publicly. Now, maybe when all is said and done, they will have the most fascinating episode of all time with how this all shook out, either good or bad. I don't think we're going to see that portion of the program, though. I really don't.
That's a really good point, but I would imagine they'll have something about it, like some type of little behind the scenes access, which any
signing on the
insight to
dotted
that will be
line is what,
interesting. Well,
yeah,
it's a lot of that.
Him
It's a lot
signing
of
on the
guys
dotted
signing the
line.
new contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did that with Logan Wilson.
Exactly.
But again,
Yep.
even that was like kind of a cool moment. It's something that you don't normally see. Like Zach Taylor greeting him as he comes into the facility to sign his contract extension was kind of like a cool moment to see for a fan, I think. And I'll just say this, Giddy, whether you watched it or not, I think it's worth pointing out that the Blackburn/Brown family and the Bengals organization, I don't know if anyone anywhere has done a better PR job of turning around their image. And a lot of it has to do with drafting Joe Burrow and just winning. But they've also gone out of their way to start getting out there and reaching out to the community a little bit. And I'm sure it's costing them a little money to do some of these things, but it's working. Like they are building some goodwill. Even like Katie Blackburn going out the day of the Taylor Swift concert, picking two random women and their kids or whatever and being like, hey, let's go to the game and sit, or let's go to the concert and sit in the front row. That type of stuff works. Like it creates goodwill. They're going viral for these things. And people aren't saying the same things about the Browns and Blackburns that they did for a couple decades.
Yeah. I mean, again, the Joe Burrow and the winning has certainly helped that. But, they also, as you mentioned, you've capitalized on that goodwill and got more goodwill. And listen, they're going to need that goodwill when we get down to brass tacks in a couple of years where we start talking about lease. So, they're not stupid either. But I think some of this stuff is really easy to do. Like Ring of Honor, been clamoring for that for years. How hard was that to do at the end of the day? Not very. I mean, some of this is common sense stuff, but to their credit, they're doing it. And you're right, fans are buying into it, and it all meshed perfectly together. But again, I think they realize they're going to need the goodwill down the road when push comes to shove with the lease conversation.
I know Elizabeth Blackburn is in charge of a lot of like that outreach stuff. It seems like, she was hired 3 or 4 years ago. Does it feel like she's kind of the main force behind this public image that they've developed?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you can't put that public image out there if you're going 2-15 or 2-14 right, or 4-12-1 all the time. You need to win too. But again, winning cures a lot, but it doesn't take that next step, right? It does a lot. Fans are going to come more because you're winning than you're doing something outreach wise or some cool show or whatever. But there's no reason you can't marry the two, and they've done a really good job of that.
Yeah, I'll just say like going back to the height of the Marvin Lewis era and when you have like Carson and Chad and those guys, like they started to win a little bit. Now, not like this group has won, obviously, but they started to win a little bit and they were making it fun again. And there wasn't near the buy-in from the team and the commitment from the team to do these extra things and kind of build they let Chad do his own thing. And that was basically the only PR they ever had, was whatever Chad was going to be doing publicly and making a scene, but they didn't go out of their way to build these guys up and do some of these extra stuff. And I'll just I'm impressed because I think they looked internal and said, we've got a problem here that we need to fix. And they've worked really hard to do it. And I think they're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah. And this is going to be, mites of a generation that, football was that. I mean, football was just football. We're putting a football team out there and that's the product and nothing else needs to go with the product. They used to have back in the day, they had a band because his dad liked the band. They had a band in the end zone and they used to have the white tiger. That went by the wayside eventually, but that was kind of like their entertainment. That was kind of what they did. And I think to him, the product was always football. Well, as we know, the product is way more than just football. Again, we fans want their team to win. That's the core of it, but it's just way more than that from an entertainment perspective. And I think when you hand it over to a younger generation, they're going to get it far better than the older generation gets it. Yeah,
definitely. All right, Skinny, anything else on the Bengals that you want to get to, or should we move on here?
I guess the only other thing is, and this podcast will be up probably after the fact, is whether or not Joe Burrow throws some publicly this week. Do we see him this week? And if not, what does that mean? Zach got asked a couple of questions yesterday about him, about whether some of this is tied to the contract. He wanted no part of talking about any of that. He said, we'll see, when he was asked about will Burrow practice this week. Again, we will see. And if he doesn't, then, when they return on Monday, because they have a Monday Labor Day practice, I mean, that's kind of game week. At that point, then I'm starting to worry a little bit about where this is heading, maybe both contract-wise and injury health-wise. So I'll be interested to see if he works one of these 2 days.
All right, let's switch gears here to the Reds. They are now 68-66 after losing 4 of their last 5 games. They've fallen 7 games behind the first-place Brewers in the NL Central and 2 games back of the Giants for the third wild card spot in the NL. Skinny, the big news of the week for the Reds is rookie Matt McLain going on the injured list with a right oblique strain. Is McLain's injury the death blow for the Reds season?
Feels like it. You're missing arguably 3 of your 4 most important bats at the moment. And I consider the 4 most important. I don't even consider Ellie one of the most important yet because he just hasn't been consistent enough. He's fun. Ball jumps off his bat whenever he connects. He doesn't connect enough at the moment. But to me, the 4 most important hitters on this club, because they always feel like they give you great at bats, are Jonathan India, Jake Fraley, Matt McLain, Spencer Steer. Those would be my 4. If you've got somebody I'm missing, TJ Friedel maybe he's the 5th, and TJ's in the lineup at the moment. But you're missing, at least 3 of your 5 most important hitters for sure. And on a night, Tuesday night, when they almost got no hit, the middle of your lineup was Ellie De La Cruz, who's struck out over 100 times and is really just struggling at the moment. He's really looks lost. Nick Martini. You couldn't have found Nick Martini with a 5-day head start and a roadmap before the season started where he was playing. You couldn't have. It's been a nice story. He's done some nice things here with the Reds. He's a 33-year-old journeyman. He's batting cleanup. And then Tyler Stevenson, who is hitting a little better of late, I suppose. He's been batting 8th and 9th since you got your lineup reshuffled. He had to hit 5th last night. I mean, you're not winning. That lineup honestly deserved to get no hit last night. It was so bad.
Where was Nick Martini before the season started?
I believe he was with the Cubs, who then DFA'd him, and then he played for Louisville. In fact, I was driving home I broadcast a high school soccer game last night, and I drove home listening to the pregame show. Our friend Jim Kelch was doing an interview with Nick Martini in Louisville, kind of about his journey. So I got a chance to hear that from Jim. And it's an interesting journey, and I'm happy for the guy. But, I mean, again, you're batting a 33-year-old journeyman with very few at-bats in the major leagues in his career. You're batting him cleanup in a playoff race. Seriously?
Right.
I there's nobody to blame. I mean, that's where Jake Fraley would be hitting, or somebody else, and Jonathan Innie would be in the middle of your lineup, and Matt McLain would be in the middle of your lineup. I mean, you're missing 3 or 4 most important – arguably maybe your 3 most important hitters are out at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, injuries have become the story for this Red season. I know everyone wants to make it about the trade deadline, and I get it. They probably could have done more, but the injuries have derailed this season regardless of whether they would have made that move or not, it feels like at this point. Because like you said, when 3 of your top 4 bats are out of the lineup and you're a young team that's kind of just piecing it together anyway, just getting by, sorry, I mean, you're not going to have much of a chance when you lose 3 guys like that.
Yeah, everybody wants to relitigate the trade deadline. I fully understand that because it's frustrating. But the key there was go get a starting pitcher. They didn't do that. It's really not been the starting pitching. I mean, Hunter Green's not been very good at the moment, but really the starting pitching since the All-Star break has been more than good enough to win games. More than good enough to win games if the lineup had done what the lineup was doing before the All-Star break. And no one was clamoring to go trade for a bat. You felt good about the lineup. I did too.
Right.
Well, again, 3 of your 4 key guys are out of that lineup. So you can relitigate the trade deadline all you want, folks. But again, this was about getting a starting pitcher, and the starting pitching hasn't cost this team.
Yeah, I would actually argue that it turned out great that they didn't go out and waste prospects on a starting pitcher, because it probably wouldn't have made any difference with all these bats going out of the lineup. Now you'd still be screwed with a starting pitcher who's maybe only giving up 2 or 3 runs a game, but you're still losing those games because your offense can't get off the schneid. So, I mean, when you look at Green, Lodolo, Votto, the guys you mentioned, I mean, the injuries have just derailed this season, and injuries are always part of the game. But with the way this season was playing out for the Reds, it would have been a lot of fun, and it would have been nice to be able to just see them stay a little bit healthier and see what they really had out of this group. Now, fortunately, you did learn a lot about your rookie class. So,
yeah, I'm not giving it up on it completely yet because you still have the head-to-head this weekend with the Cubs to make up some ground. But after that, if you can't win that series and make up a little bit of ground, I know their schedule's not as hard down the stretch, but I still think it's a big ask. Unless, God love Fraley, he's on a rehab assignment. He's trying to play through it for the boys. And, maybe he can, and maybe he comes provide some pop. And McLain's back in another week. That's a big hope. And hopefully Hunter Green turns this around. Again, the way it looks right now, that's a big hope. I'm not completely unsold on it yet. But yeah, I mean, it feels like it's coming off the rails for sure.
But I would agree because you're still only 2 games back of the Giants for a wild card spot. I mean, you're still, and you're playing them head to head one more game here as we're recording this on Thursday. So you got one more game against them, make up that game. I mean, they're still very much in the mix for a wild card spot. Now, the problem is things are obviously going in the wrong direction and you got a lot of guys out. But I think it's silly to me, the people who are getting really pissed off and acting like this season's a failure or whatever. And it's like same old Reds. Like, this was a great, unexpected season where they're like already surpassing their win total with a bunch of games still to go. Like, before the year started, based on what they had done this offseason, we thought this was going to be a disaster and a lost cause of a season. And instead, we had a team that was competitive the whole year pretty much. And we found out that a lot of these young guys that they were banking on being good for the next few years are good. They're talented and they've got a chance to be really good potentially. So, I mean, it's hard for me to see this year for anything but being a success and a good sign for things going forward. I just don't really get the collective concern or frustration around the city.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm with you on that.
I do think Corbin Carroll of the Diamondbacks is now locked up National League Rookie of the Year with McLean going on the DL. I don't think he'll have any chance of sneaking up on him there now. But the one other thing on McLean, do you think he has been the Reds' best player this year?
I do. He strikes out a little more than I would like him to strike out, but he's shown you. He made I felt bad. He's such a good defensive player. He made that bad error the other night in the extra inning game that they came back and won. But yeah, I mean, he's shown you he can play second and short. He's shown you he could probably hit at some point 1 through 4 in your lineup. I think he's got enough power. I don't think he probably will because you're going to have some other power guys in your lineup. But he could honestly hit 1 through 4 in your lineup. And even though he strikes out a lot, it doesn't bother me like it bothers me with some other players. I don't know why that is, because it just feels like whenever he gives you a good at bat and doesn't overswing, it's just weird. It's weird to me because he does strike out a ton. He's over 100 strikeouts on the season. Again, hopefully that's something he can cut down on moving forward. I think if he does, he's going to be a 315 hitter if he can do that. But even if not, he's going to be one of those guys. I love the guy that hits that hard 290 where it just feels like you look up and he gives you a good at bat or two every single solitary night.
Hard 290 is got to be one of my new favorite phrases. I'm using that forever going forward. But it is so funny because the good at bat thing is exactly, and maybe that's just us being anecdotal and making up narratives about a guy we like to watch play, but it does feel the same way to me. His strikeouts don't feel the same way other guys do, where they go up there and they don't really have a plan and they look overmatched. They're wailing at breaking balls in the dirt or something. It's like you just pitch that guy the same time every way because he doesn't know how to handle himself up there. That's not McLean. Like he doesn't have an obvious weakness in terms of his zone that you want to throw to. It's not like he's up there just waving at bad pitches or anything. He just, for whatever reason, he does strike out a ton, but you don't feel real bad about it watching it because it looks like he's giving you great at bats every time. It is a weird thing. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, Ellie looks like he flails, right? I mean, you throw him anything that's off speed, he's flailing at it. I mean, when he connects, it's fun, but he looks flailing. But McLean, it's like, he just struck out. But boy, that was a good strike. He fouled off too hard and took 2 balls, and they got him on a good pitch. But it is weird because he's got a bunch of strikeouts.
Yeah. One other thing to get to here with the Reds, Skinny, Andrew Abbott is averaging 4.5 innings in his last 6 starts with a 6.67 ERA. He's over 142 innings on the year if you factor in the 54 innings he pitched in AA and AAA. He's never pitched more than 120 innings in a year before. Is it time to shut Andrew Abbott down?
No, I'd like to see him pitch through it. I would. I understand that. I mean, if we get to the final week plus and you're out of it and he had another start or two, then maybe. I do think probably fatigue is starting to become a factor. But listen, I hate to be old school guy, but I'm so sick of babying these guys. I really and truly am. I let him pitch through some of this. I'd like to see him pitch through this. I'd like to see him fight through some adversity here. I really would.
Well, my only thing is, and I don't want the guy to get injured.
I don't want to be Johnny Hardo that you got to throw a complete game every time out, and I need to see you throw 300 innings and make 42 starts. I don't need that. But, the days of taking Graham Ashcraft out of games because he gave up a home run and he's at 78 pitches is pissing me off. I mean, that guy can pitch deeper in the games and should.
Yeah, well, and the thing with Abbott too, and I always think this with young pitchers is, okay, he's never done this before. I understand it. We're in uncharted waters. But aren't you going to expect him to do this at some point? Like, when is it an okay time to decide, yes, this is
Right.
the year that he's going to pitch more? Like next year, if you're in the same spot and the team's better and you're in first place in the NL Central, then what? Then it's okay to do it? Like, that's the only thing. I just don't understand when is it the year that it's okay to stretch him out and let him figure it out? To me, this would seem like, as long as you don't feel like he's at risk physically and he's not going to be injured, this would seem like the year to let him go ahead and take his lumps here in the last few starts of the season, because you're kind of falling out of it already and you probably don't have much of a chance to compete for it all this year. But hopefully next year you do. And hopefully next year he is one of the key pieces to that. Now, I get, like I heard, I think it was Mo yesterday on his show talking about, he said, well, your whole strategy this year, especially at the trade deadline, was to play for the future. You should be playing for the future and worry about Andrew Abbott's future. I get that. But again, I just wonder, like, you're going to expect him to pitch more innings than 120 next year. So why not try to stretch him out this year and try to build up to that?
I'm with you. And that's the thing. What is the magic number? No one knows. I mean, there's no, like, here's the magic number for this guy that he can't pitch above it or his arm will fall off. That's the thing to me. I don't think there is any kind of magic number to any of this. Same with pitch count. 100 pitches, is that the magical number? Well, maybe for some guys, 85 is. Maybe for some guys, the third time through the order is. Maybe for other guys, they're fine third time through the order. And, they can go 125 pitches. Not everybody is the same dude. So stop treating everybody as the same dude.
That's a really good point. We get so caught up in putting these guys in boxes, especially when it comes to like the innings pitched and things like that, where everyone's body is so different. I mean, we know that for a fact. Science has told us that a billion different times. It's why all these different diets are out there and everything else. I mean, everyone's body functions a little bit differently. I don't think you can just decide that, yeah, this is the cutoff point for every pitcher. I mean, for everyone's going to be a little bit different. And I'm with you. I'm over the babying pitchers too much. Now, if you're worried about him, if there's some reason to think, yeah, like physically he doesn't look the same or he's starting to wear down,
right,
we don't want him to get injured, absolutely shut him down. But if he feels great and everything looks good and his mechanics still look good and he's just taking some lumps because he's hitting a wall, let him pitch through that. Let him figure it out.
Yeah, and back to the body types, why did fat Tony Gwynn be able to play every day and in shape Eric Davis, unfortunately not? I mean, if you were looking at two bodies in that era of baseball and go, which body would you rather have? I go, well, give me the Eric Davis body. And yet Tony Gwynn was able to play and Eric got hurt all the time.
Let fat guys be fat. I've said it a million times. I said it when Jonathan Broxton got to town. They tried to make him work out. He hurt his back. Let the man be fat. This fat guys know how to handle their bodies. They'll take care of it.
One of the great lines of all time, right? John Kruk had it. John Kruk, who was kind of portly himself, said, I don't have to worry about pulling a muscle because you can't pull fat.
That's right. Fathletes get it. Like, those are the most dangerous guys in all of sports. The guy that can drink 20 beers, roll out of bed with a hangover at noon, and still walk in and go 3 for 4 with a couple of homers. Those are the guys that are the ones you don't want to mess with. Just leave them alone. You can't take the God-given ability away that they have. All right.
That's correct.
Let's get into our college football segment, Skinny. We've actually got some college football games to pick. We are 0-0. You're not getting credit for your Notre Dame win last week. That was not part of our pick.
Fair enough.
So we've got Ball State at Kentucky. Linus, by the way, great week 1 slate. Like, I'm not saying there's a ton of big-time games here, though there are a few that I'm interested in, but a great week 1 slate. Yeah. There's interesting games on Thursday, interesting games on Friday, and then on Saturday, from a watching perspective, we've got the Cats at noon, then we've got Ohio State and the Bearcats playing in that 3 to 3:30 time slot. It's really going to be a nice day of football. But Saturday at noon, we've got Ball State at Kentucky. The Wildcats are 26.5-point favorites. The total is 49.5.
Yeah, I think Kentucky maybe gets the 49.5 by themselves. I really am bullish on this offense. I think it's going to be really, really good. I think it'll be a better offense than the Will Levis, Wan'Dale Robinson, Chris Rodriguez offense. I really do. I think they've got the offensive line settled. Those young receivers who were standouts as freshmen, are all back. You got a great tight end room. Devin Leary, I think, is a more polished quarterback at this point by far, and he is, because he's done it way more than Will Levis did. You got Liam Cohen back. I think Kentucky rolls in the opener. I'll go Kentucky 45, Ball State 10. So Kentucky in the over for me. And yes, I know I'm a homer, but I'm really bullish on this offense.
All right. So I like Kentucky to roll in this game as well. The 26.5 feels easy to me, but I'm going to go just under. I'm going to say Kentucky 42, Ball State 7. So we're staying a half point under at 49. I'm going to go with UK and the under in this one. But I'm with you on Liam Cohen. I think that's going to be big for Kentucky. I just feel like at the end of the day, we still know who the head coach is. That's a defensive mind right there. He has a hard time scoring a lot of points. Saturday at 3 p.m., we've got Ohio State at Indiana. Pretty fun Big Ten matchup to start things off, even though Indiana will stink, I'm sure. Ohio State is a 30-point favorite. 59.5 is the total for this one.
It's a really good Ohio State team on both sides of the ball. The question is at quarterback. They made a decision for week one. I don't know if that's the long-term decision. We talked about that a little bit last week when we did our college football preview. But I just think because of that, because of the new quarterback situation, being on the road, look, Ohio State's going to win comfortably, but that's a big number to me, 30. I don't think Indiana's very good, mind you, but I'll go Ohio State 34, Indiana 14.
All right, so you're on Indiana and the under here.
Yeah.
I am. We're on opposite sides of this. Well, I take that back. I'm on the under as well. 59.5 just feels like a lot. So I'm going to do the same thing I did in the Ball State Kentucky game. I'm going to go half a point under that and say it's 45 to 14. So I'm going to go with 59 as the total. Ohio State and the under for me. I just think Ohio State, even with the two quarterback system, and I do think Devin Brown will end up being the better quarterback between the two and will end up being the starter at some point this year. I still think they don't score under 40 points in week one. They're going to light up the scoreboard. That's what Ohio State does. And then we have a problem here because I don't have any lines for the Cincinnati game. I cannot find a line anywhere.
Yeah, I'm going to
look. Think it's out yet.
I'm going to look for one. We can pick a score though, and then we can see because the lines for a lot of those games where it's a UC versus Eastern come out the morning of a lot of times.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate if we're doing this segment.
I would say
I do not have a
22
line
and a
on either,
half.
so I say we just pick a score.
All right, I'd say 22 and a half is going to be the spread. Because a lot of the computer models I saw were picking somewhere around 23-ish.
Okay. I'm really interested to see what this UC team is all about with Emory Jones at quarterback, new coach, bunch of transfers. This could be really good or this could go haywire. I think it's a big ask in the opener for it to go as perfectly as you'd like. Eastern Kentucky, while it's a step down, obviously, in competition, they've got a really good quarterback, a really good offense. They made the playoffs last year. And I think because of the newness for UC, it's just going to be choppy. UC's going to win it and going to win it comfortably, but I'll go Bearcats 34-17.
Yeah, I have no idea how to project UC's offense. I don't know really anything about those guys. Like all the key players are going to be transfers pretty much. You even got some key new offensive linemen that we don't know about. The defense, I think, is still going to be pretty good. I think we have an idea of what they'll look like. And I think we saw them last year. They were really good defensively. Some of those guys are back and they've added some new guys that I think will help. I expect the defense to be pretty good. I'm thinking this is probably an underplay for me, even though we don't know what the number is yet. My guess is I'm going to like the under number pretty well. And I'll say UC wins this one 35-14. All right, Skinny, do you have any other picks of the week? We always like to give people our favorite pick of the week or a parlay or something else to look at. Do you have anything for week one in college football?
Yeah. Now, again, you said earlier we're taping this on Thursday. We're actually taping it on Wednesday, but I get it. You're a dad. You got dad stuff on your brain.
The days don't even mean anything.
You're good. Anymore. Yeah, I'm going to go to the Thursday night game on ESPN, Florida at Utah. I know Cam Rising's hurt, but Utah's really good at home. I don't think much of this Florida team. Utah's laying 4.5. That feels like that's my one pick of the week. I usually give you a teaser. I'll probably start doing that in the NFL and all that stuff. But I like the Thursday night game with Utah. They owe Florida from last year. So yeah, give me Utah by double digits.
Okay, I like that. I'm excited about that game. That's a great Thursday night game on week one. There's a couple things I like here. One, Alabama's playing Middle Tennessee. Alabama always beats the brakes off whoever their first opponent is. I'm not interested in the total line here, but Alabama minus 9.5 in the first quarter against Middle Tennessee feels good to me. I'm going to go Alabama minus 9.5. I have a feeling that might be like 20-0 at the end of the first quarter. So I'm good with that. And then the other game I like a lot.
That's a good. Hang on, Rick. That's a good pick, except for one thing. If I wish I knew who the starting quarterback was. And I just hope it's not the Notre Dame guy because I think he stunk. And if he's the guy, your 10 points in the first quarter may be hard to come by.
I don't think it matters for Alabama playing Middle Tennessee. I think Nick Saban takes pride on just being freaking ready to play against crappy opponents because one of my favorite traditions is betting huge numbers for Alabama in the first couple weeks of the season. And they usually seem to fare pretty well. NC State also is a 14.5-point favorite over UConn. Last year, I think they won 41-10 against UConn or something like that. I mean, they beat them by 4 or 5 touchdowns at least. So I like NC State minus 14.5 over UConn. I know NC State is not supposed to be very good this year, but UConn always stinks. Like they're always terrible. They overachieved record-wise last year because they scheduled it that way. I like NC State minus 14.5.
Don't forget, Devin Leary's not the quarterback there any longer, and UConn did get better as last year went along.
I actually don't care if you were the quarterback for NC State in that game. I would still like that 14.5 number.
All right, fair enough.
All right. We've got a little time for Ask Anything, although we're right over here. We've got some timing constraints as well today, so we'll go a little bit quick here. One of the only questions I actually got was out of all the regular radio and TV hits you do, Skinny, do you have a favorite? And also, do you like broadcasting sports, doing talk radio, doing TV, writing, or something else more?
No, I love broadcasting games. I've always enjoyed doing that. And I do a bunch of high school games in the area. I really do. I just have been a radio play-by-play junkie my whole life. I love being in the car in the summertime and flipping through the dial, listening to out-of-town baseball games if the Reds aren't on. Like last night, I flipped to ESPN 1000 Chicago just because I knew they had a game on. It was a terrible game, and I just like the ambience of that. So, yeah, I like that. As far as shows go, I enjoy almost all the segments I do, or else I wouldn't do them with people. I do like my Wednesday Bengals hit with Mo just because he's kind of got a little attitude like me, like very cynical, and he doesn't take himself too seriously. None of the guys really do, to be honest with you. So, I wouldn't do any of the hits I do if I didn't enjoy doing them. But the one during football season with Mo, I really enjoy that one.
Yeah, I always enjoy doing Mo's show as well. He's got the right mindset, I think, to handle us. I enjoy doing that type of stuff. Now, I got another thing that was sent to us by multiple people that they wanted to get your reaction to. This is from Irish Breakdown on Sports Illustrated. It's a Notre Dame podcast. And Skinny, I know there are a lot of people that are listening to our podcast. We have a lot more listeners than we do people viewing on YouTube. So we're playing this video on YouTube. If you want to go watch it, you can watch it on our YouTube page. But otherwise, Skinny, can you kind of explain, as I hit play on this, will you kind of explain what you're watching and what you see this gentleman, Vince DiDario, on the left doing as this quick clip plays? It's only 12 seconds long.
Navy never forced him to pull it and throw it. So I think they only completed.
He just leaned back in his chair. Looks very uncomfortable. And he just left his chair.
Throw a lot.
I'm going to guess he's either had to go puke or he crapped himself.
Yeah, so obviously that's what the internet thinks, is this man has crapped himself. Now, let me tell you, here's what he said happened there. He came back and he said, oh, boy, yeah, just got double quad cramps hit me at the same time, and I had to bounce and take care of that. So the double quad cramp was his excuse. So, Skinny, I think it's obvious. We can go ahead and say it. He crapped his pants. I mean, he crapped his pants while doing a podcast. Coach Brown.
Okay, so I've never had quad cramps. I've had calf cramps before. I guess you can cramp in your quad. Have you ever had quad cramps? I've had calf a ton.
I have. Nothing that would hit me like just sitting still. I've had like cramping in my quad during actual activity when you're like going hard during a practice or something. But here's the thing. You know what's never happened to anyone? Never in the history of the entire world that they got double quad cramps at the exact same time while sitting doing a Notre Dame podcast. It's been proven. It's never, ever happened. It's impossible. So you've got to come up with a better excuse than that.
He got quad cramps because he tried to pinch it in and keep it in and couldn't do it. That's why he got quad cramps.
Yeah, he was doing the double sphincter pinch and pulled a couple muscles, I think.
Correct.
Skinny, what would you do here if, I mean, now we're not doing this show live, so it wouldn't matter, but what would be your play there if you try to sneak out a fart and it wasn't a fart and you got to go? Or do you just sit there and finish off the podcast in your soiled drawers, or what do you do?
I think before that would come to that, if you know it's going to be a potentially bad one coming, I just have to say, I have to excuse myself for a second, folks. I have to go to the restroom. Sorry.
I think based on the look on that guy's face, he had no idea what was coming. He thought he was because he leaned forward a little bit. If you watch it, I think he thought he was going to let out just a little SBD in his own home, and then he squirted.
Well, see, at that point, depending on the magnitude of it, I think you roll through it, man. You just sit there. No one knows. No one can see it.
It's a podcast, right? I mean, no one can.
I will say both these guys look like they need a shave too.
Look, see how he's leaning forward there? That's the moment right there.
Pull a lot of
he's leaning forward.
Because
he's leaning
never
forward.
Look at his face.
There it was. Yeah. See, he was
so
trusting
I think he only
a fart.
completed like 3 RPO
That's
throws
so
the
obvious.
whole time.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing, Skinny. They deleted this. They deleted this little thing. So this was a live show that was on their YouTube. They went back. They edit out that part so you can't see him, and it just goes full screen on the other guy talking. And so that so they wanted to cover it up, which means he crapped his pants. I mean, that's you got to.
Yeah, I agree.
Look, if you want to lie about this, you got to say there was someone breaking into my house with a gun, or my kid was falling into the
my
pool.
house is on fire.
Yeah, I mean, come up with something better than I had double quad cramps at the exact same time. I had to stretch it out. I mean,
I will say their background and backdrop is really nice. The Irish breakdown thing in the background is very nice.
Oh, I mean, these guys podcast like 16 times a day. I was looking at their YouTube page. They had like 4 uploads from yesterday, each that are like very long. So they've got like a whole team of guys. Just what was that called? Irish Breakdown. Be sure to check them out. I'm sure it's great coverage. But also, you might catch a live poop.
Question. Yeah, correct. Here's my question: did that chair survive? Did he get a new chair?
Well, he returned in the same chair, but I'm going to say let's keep an eye on the next few podcasts to see if he might want to roll a new one in there, because I think it's kind of like shoes for me. If I stepped in dog poop in a pair of shoes, they're dead to me. I throw them away. I'm not washing them out because there'll forever be poop shoes. You never get them back to like normal, even though you clean them. I think it's the same way with an office desk chair. If you poop in it, you got to throw it away.
Yeah, very fair point. All right. Appreciate everybody with the questions. Keep them coming. We'll be back next week. Thanks to you, Rick. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by Blake, the Attorney Maislin.
We have you covered on all the sports news at local12.com and here on YouTube. Just click the links below and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You'll get updated instantly.